Hello, and welcome to this ABB Enterprise Software presentation, preview of key changes and potential impacts, Spring 2017 North American Power Reference Case. And now let me introduce you to our presenters from the Energy Portfolio Management Group at ABB, Tom Sweet, Director of the Global Power Reference Cases, Kathy Jones, Principal Consultant, Tristan Wallace, Advisory Consultant, and Garrick Hoops, Senior Consultant. Tom Sweet will now begin this presentation.
Thank you, Dana. Good day, everyone. My name is Thomas Sweet, and as Dana mentioned, I'm the Director of ABB Global Reference Cases. My team is responsible for producing, we're going to talk about the North American Power Reference Case today, and we also do consulting around that reference case, and that includes custom scenarios, any market analysis, as well as asset valuations. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, the legal disclaimer. Any information in this presentation should not be construed as a commitment by ABB, and we're not liable for any damages that might result from your use of this document. I'll now talk about the agenda. So we're going to start out talking a little bit about ABB and the group that we're in, which is Energy Portfolio Management. I'll then discuss the reference case product, talk a little bit about the methodology, and then we'll get into a discussion of all the drivers behind the reference case. Kathy Jones will discuss renewables, Tristan Wallace will discuss environmental, and then Garrick Hoops will discuss the fuels. And then I'll just wrap up with any questions and a description of some additional advisory services. So now talking a bit about EPM, or Energy Portfolio Management, on the next slide. Want to just mention, we're now part of ABB. And ABB is a $40 billion global company with a very long history. It was the former, the official merger of ABB happened in 1988, but the predecessor companies have a long history going back into the 1800s. A couple points I want to bring out here. The whole the Ventyx integration within ABB, that process started back in 2010, and it has been completed. But I want to mention that, Ventyx as a brand has been retired. So if you see any emails coming from ABB and not Ventyx, don't delete them. It is from, it is from us. So a little bit about EPM itself and how does it fit within ABB. Again, enterprise software is now the new name for what people might have remember as Ventyx, and we are part of the Power Grids division within ABB. I'll now talk a little bit about how our EPM group fits into enterprise software on the next page. EPM really has four categories: power market analytics, energy market intelligence, portfolio planning and operation, and DERMS. And reference case is in the top part, the power market analytics. For those of you who have Velocity Suite, they're under the energy market intelligence group. All right, next I'll discuss the actual reference case product. So first, I want to answer a very simple question: as what is the ABB reference case? Well, real simply, it's a lot more than just power prices. I mean, we're looking at all the conditions and trends in the North American markets, and that includes power, it includes fuels, it also includes environmental, and we develop a fundamental forecast for these markets. So again, it's a supply and demand model, and another aspect of our forecast is that it is unbiased. We're independent and unconflicted. We're used by owners of assets. We're used by individuals who wish to acquire assets. So again, the fact that we're used by the entire spectrum of asset owners and market participants, helps make us. It's an important consideration. And then finally, ABB utilizes all of our market-leading software and intelligence products. So again, that's another highlight of the reference case. So why should the reference case or the ABB reference case be your preferred choice? Well, I think the key word here is integration, both in terms of products and as well as the market modeling. So from the product perspective, again, many other consulting firms use ABB products to perform their own analyses and produce their own forecast of prices, but they lack certain benefits. One is our proprietary integrated model, which I'll go into more detail later, and that handles the integration of market model. But more importantly, from a process perspective, with having Velocity Suite, our integrated model, ProMod, our advisors, all under ABB, we capture a lot of synergy by working with the groups. Also, ABB is recognized as the gold standard in the industry. We wish we came up with that as part of a marketing campaign, but that's actually what many of our clients refer to us as. Also, we've been doing this a long time and been learning and growing as the years have passed. We've been producing reference cases since 2000, and last reference case was one of those decade events. We've been producing the reference case semi-annually for 30 releases. So again, that's unmatched by other consulting groups. So moving into a little bit more of the details on the reference case, we have we cover North America. The reference case product considers Mexico, newly added. And then we have, I guess, our 5, I'll put in air quotes, classic reference case products. We have a Midwest, a Northeast, Southeast, ERCOT, and WECC. So again, from a modeling perspective, in the traditional U.S. and Canada, we consider 73 pricing zones, and I'll get into details about what that means. And then in Mexico, we have 57 pricing zones. So getting into the, that's the geographic view of the product. Now let's talk about, what you get with the reference case. As I mentioned, we're a fundamental forecast. It's a 25-year outlook. And for each of the zones we forecast, we produce hourly electric energy and capacity prices. We do annual capacity additions, retirements. We develop a natural gas forecast for each of those zones, as well as 30 other liquid market centers, delivered coal prices, reserve margins, and resource mix. Now, in our Mexico reference case, again, we're beginning to construct that database. Well, it is constructed, it's ready to go, but we are continually updating it. So again, some of the aspects that we have in the classic reference case are not yet implemented, but again, the important things are there. We have the energy prices, we know additions and retirements, fuel prices, as well as reserve margins and resource mix. Additionally, in reference case, we have some regional forecasts. So that includes emission allowance prices for both SO2, NOx, and CO2, where regional rules allow that. We also produce an annual REC forecast. Now, overall, the product, we produce a base case, and we do at least 3 scenarios. So we have a high and low gas price, and then we have one that varies based on various policy or market uncertainties. So again, for the spring cycle, we'll be looking at a kind of an energy in transition scenario, which we're informally referring to as the Trump scenario. Additionally, many of our clients always want to see a carbon price forecast, so we will do a CO2 tax as well. I want to mention our base case does not have a U.S. national CO2, but if there are various state or regional CO2 requirements, those are included. I want to talk now a little bit about the report itself. So the next slide lists both the chapters and the appendices of the report. And this presentation, will mirror this flow. I mean, we'll talk about the fuels, we'll talk about renewable developments as well as emission developments. Now, when we deliver the data, we produce the results in Excel format, and the next slide identifies the types of files we produce. So we have our base results, we have our scenario result, we have high gas, low gas, as well as the hourly prices. And for national subscribers, we produce monthly short-term forecasts, which is the front 24-month forecast of NYMEX prices and how that impacts electricity prices. Finally, the base result file is probably used 95% of the time, and I've highlighted on the right side of this slide the tabs in that Excel spreadsheet. So again, this mirrors what I've talked about earlier about what we deliver in terms of results for the reference case. Now, reference case comes out twice a year. So the next slide talks about our schedule. Again, we have our pre-release webcast today. We will be releasing the spring results on May 5th, and then we'll follow up with 2 webcasts. On May 18th will be the subscriber webcast, and then on, which is it'll be a intensive 2-hour webcast where we get into all the details behind the reference case. And then we'll have a more general reference case webcast that lasts about an hour, followed on June 7th. And then finally, in mid-June, we'll have a New York workshop. And again, that date, we may slip that a week, again, to coincide with the New York Energy Week, but more details on that will follow. So that will then wrap up spring, and then we start the process again for fall. The only thing that's missing in the fall cycle is we're not doing an actual workshop. All right, that's the reference case. Now let's get into the details. What is our methodology? Well, the next slide discusses, the integration that I talked about earlier. Again, one of the biggest strengths of the reference case is that we have this integrated market model. So we start out with a variety of data, which comes from Velocity Suite, our independent research, but also we have, for our fuels, we obtain supply curve information for natural gas from Rystad, and for coal from the Commodities Research Unit. I believe that's what CRU stands for. And all that information then gets fed into our integrated model, which captures the interaction between all the various markets. So as, for example, if we retire coal units and that's replaced by natural gas and renewables, that change in power sector demand for both gas and coal feed back to those models and, modifies the prices. So out of the integrated model, from a capacity perspective, we get a list of any additions or retirements, because again, it's a 25-year forecast. We need to have some assumptions for those. If there are any environmental retrofits, for example, in a clean power plant type scenario, we would consider any retrofits if economic. And then some of the other prices, capacity price, of course, our fuel prices, emissions, and renewable energy credits. All that information is then fed into ProMod to develop the final electric energy prices. So now I'm going to talk about the demand aspects of the model. So one thing is, we'll talk about our peak forecast summary. And on this graphic, the key, what we're showing here is how our forecast has changed going back to really spring of '08, the pre-recession. Both the magnitude of the forecast has changed, as well as the growth rate. So, currently in spring, we're looking at, again, an annual, this is a national average growth rate of about 0.7%. Last year, it was about 0.8%. So even within a year, I mean, we achieved a fairly significant reduction. And if you go all the way back to 2008, again, the growth rate was, about 1.4%. So again, what's causing that? Well, initially after the recession, we were thinking, well, it's just the reduced economic activity. And that was part of it early on. But what we have found is that with increasing distributed generation, energy efficiency, demand response, that's really putting downward pressure on the long-term growth rates. And in some regions of the country, those growth rates are actually negative due to the amount of distributed generation entering the mix. So let's talk a little bit about distributed generation. The next graph shows how the amount of DG is increasing with time. So the graphic shows for the various ISOs what the growth is. And in general, except for ERCOT, we have fairly significant growth. So I want to mention, though, if you look at MISO, that also includes, some fairly significant estimates for energy efficiency. So that's why the MISO has a much higher growth rate. So that was distributed generation. Let's talk now about energy efficiency. So again, what states have energy efficiency resource standards? Well, right now there are 26 states that are implementing it. 24 have a standalone policy, and two states allow the standards to count toward the RES. There are a few exceptions. Indiana has rolled back its guidelines. Florida targets, they're really too small to even mention. There are some states that have voluntary standards, and then also it's not really a standard, but they're requirements for the various utilities or power producers. So that summarizes the demand. We'll now talk briefly about supply. And we'll start by looking at how, the expansion, okay, of what new units are being built. So what this graphic is showing is since 2000, what has been the, what has been built and when. So again, in the early 2000s, or I guess I heard a new term, it's more from our friends across the pond. They refer to those as the noughties. So in that era, we had the rise of the merchant. That was in response to really a lack of building of resources through the latter half of the century. But then also with market rules changing, we had a lot of merchant generation coming into the mix to meet the supply needs. We then had some new coal being built. Again, back in those time frames, we were looking at a lot of uncertainty with natural gas prices, relatively high natural gas prices. Again, the shale revolution really hadn't taken off yet. So again, people were looking at coal as a long-term, the economic choice. Starting around 2004, 2005, because of state renewable portfolio standard mandates, we started seeing more renewables being built. And then most recently, you have the next gen nuclear. We have a little bit being added with TVA Watts Bar coming online. And then when we get out into the latter part of the 2019-2020 period, we have Vogtle and Summer coming on. So that was expansion. So now let's look at retirements to round out the supply side. What this is showing is the retirements. So again, we have actual retirements through 2016, and then going forward is what has been proposed or announced. And again, since 2000, we've retired roughly 83 gigawatts of coal, and that's due to environmental pressure, as well as a low natural gas price due to low-cost shale gas entering the mix. We've had 9 gigawatts of nuclear retire. Again, low gas price and consequently low power prices were the driving force behind that. And then again, other, gas and oil and other resources retiring, primarily because of age or just older, inefficient plants. So that wraps up my discussion. I will now turn over the presentation to Kathy Jones, and she will discuss renewables.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to provide you with a quick overview on the renewables picture. So in this next slide, we will be reviewing with you the operating level of renewables in the ISOs. The couple of key takeaways here are in the Northwest area, where you see nearly 14 gigawatts of renewables. This is reflecting increasing solar, as well as in the Southeast FERC region, where you're seeing also an increase in solar, where the penetration has grown from fall 16 to our spring case from 8 to 23%. So a lot of that is driven from PURPA in these particular areas, because these are not part of your organized markets. But we're also seeing that the Southeast and ISO New England are continuing to be dominated by biomass, as well as California with solar, and MISO, PJM, and ERCOT are being dominated with the wind. And so then we move on to the pipeline that we have seen from our Velocity Suite product. As you can see in 2017, there's a pretty significant pipeline there. And of that pipeline, we have 29 gigawatts of the wind where it is not actually under construction. So this is a true pipeline. But the timing there is a critical issue with the wind, in that with the IRS safe harbor, these resources may or may not come online in 2017, but they would still be able to qualify for the production tax credit. Also, we have nearly 22 gigawatts of solar in the pipeline. As we saw in the operating region where we had the increases, we also see that in this pipeline for the wind, the major significant increases there are going to be in the SPP and MISO region. So they're actually expecting more than ERCOT. And then from a solar perspective, that's going to be dominated by the Northwest region, which also had a significant increase from operating, as well as in the Southeast, where even the Southeast now is expecting to add in 2017 more than you would see in California. So we do see that increasing, and that's not being driven necessarily from RPS requirements, but also from corporate sustainability, and also from just really clean energy standards and the ability for the Southeast and those Northwest regions to accommodate solar, and also from a declining cost perspective. As I mentioned, we did say that there were some clean energy standards, and so in the next graphic, we actually look here at the changes that have been proposed over the region. So an update from fall is that Maryland has actually increased their RPS, as well as DC and Michigan. Ohio did finally unfreeze their standards. But another really significant thing that is changing is the implementation or the expectations of offshore wind. So we had the first offshore wind project come online in 2016, but now that's being followed up by New York and Massachusetts having offshore wind targets / goals. Maryland already had an offshore wind target, but these are actually new targets. So you're seeing New York with 2.4 gigawatts and Massachusetts with a 1,600 megawatt target. So that's still to be foreseen whether those targets will be met either with the actual construction of offshore wind or with the purchase of renewable credits. Another major change has been the storage. So Massachusetts does have a storage target that hasn't been set yet. However, the conservative estimate is that it would be about 600 megawatts compared to where they have an effective cost study that was conducted of about over 1,700 megawatts. And then you also have Oregon with a storage mandate. So they have joined California on the storage mandate. But also in the mix is we're seeing states that are proposing significant increases in their RPS, such as California and Massachusetts, going to 100%. These have not been implemented, they're just actually being proposed. So there's a number of states who are looking to make considerable increases. But one of the things I mentioned earlier was the driver behind the growth in the Northwest and the Southeast region. One of the major drivers, as we'll see in the next slide, are the PURPA policies. So in the Northwest and the Southeast region, because there's not organized markets, we see people who are doing the solar projects within those regions, and that's being driven from, one, they can get a PPA, and two, post-PPA, they can rely on avoided costs from PURPA. However, as you can see in this particular map, there are several states that are considering revising their contract terms and also revising the sizing as well as the avoided cost pricing methodology. So that could be a pretty significant risk associated with some of these solar projects in the pipeline for those Northwest and Southeast regions where they're considering rolling back those contract terms from 10 to 15, from 15 to 20 years to as little as 2 to 3. And so that being said, our final slide, we're looking at, as far as in our reference case, you can see that the declining cost of solar, so we're expecting to have much more penetration of solar in our spring reference case compared to wind. We also have wind technology improvements, but not to this extent that we see in the solar cost. This is really solar cost in the 2016 timeframe actually declined approximately 28% in just that 1 year time frame. So we're only looking at, a 3% improvement year over year of these costs. So that's a pretty conservative estimate. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Tristan to discuss with you the environmental.
Great. Well, thanks, Kathy. So here's an overview of some of the recent developments in environmental policy, and I'll start off first with conventional pollutants on the left. So the cross-state air pollution rule was revised late last year for seasonal NOx emissions. 22 states have updated emission budgets, and as I'll show in an upcoming slide, reductions relative to 2016 will be required for 2017 and beyond. The MATS rule, although the initial compliance period has passed, continues to be litigated as states and industry groups challenge the revised rulemaking, including what is the maximum achievable control technology and what is appropriate and necessary. Now next, in the middle column is federal carbon policy, which has obviously taken a different turn under President Trump. The EPA's Clean Power Plan was finalized over a year and a half ago and is still on hold by the Supreme Court. And the DC Circuit Court of Appeals has yet to rule on its legal merits. However, just last week, President Trump signed an executive order that requires the EPA to review the CPP, and the Department of Justice requested that litigation be halted on the rule. We don't yet know if it will be granted, but the CO2 rule for new plants, which is the carbon pollution standards, is also subject to legal review. And recently, oral arguments that were scheduled for the 17th of this month were postponed following the executive order. So if that's any indication, we may not see the DC Circuit Court rule before the CPP is remanded back to the EPA. Also, I want to know that conversations are still taking place on future carbon legislation. In February, a group that includes former Republican leaders released a carbon tax plan. It would set an initial price of $40 per ton and would give the revenue back to Americans through dividends. There would also be border carbon adjustments for international trade and a rollback of regulations and authority by the EPA to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. And recently there's been mixed signals coming from the White House over whether a carbon tax is even on the table as part of future legislation. So we'll have to wait and see how that evolves. Moving on to regional carbon policies, RGGI is still awaiting the outcome of its 2016 program review that will define the details of the program going forward. RGGI has another stakeholder meeting on the 20th of this month to discuss modeling results, but we still don't know when the process will be concluded. As I'll show later, prices in the quarterly auctions continue to track positive and negative developments for carbon policy. Next, WCI, the linked California-Quebec allowance market, still has a lot of policy and legal uncertainty. We are awaiting the outcome of a lawsuit that challenges California's allowance auctions and are expecting an outcome later this month. Also, policymakers are still trying to pass legislation to extend the program beyond 2020, with multiple bills currently being considered. Also, the California Air Resources Board is expected to vote in June on program amendments to extend the program beyond 2020. Previously, this was put on hold to give the environmental justice community more time to weigh in. Now, the environmental justice community has emerged as a key opponent of cap and trade in recent years, arguing that cap and trade allows local pollution to avoid being reduced in disadvantaged communities. Their input into the process could have a key bearing on California cap and trade's ultimate fate. Finally, progress continues to be made toward linking the California-Quebec market with Ontario. The California governor has approved the linkage and it is ready for adoption by the Air Resources Board. Also, Ontario just held its first solo auction last month and it cleared it at a penny above the floor. As for Alberta, we are still waiting details of a new carbon tax scheme that will start next year, replacing the current ESCO program. It is thought, based on a past proposal, that the carbon tax will be based on a standard of an efficient gas plant. The province also plans to retire all coal capacity by 2030, but this carbon tax will serve to further weaken coal's competitiveness before it is phased out. And lastly, I won't get into the details, but there continues to be momentum for other states and provinces to adopt cap and trade programs. Overall, a lot of the attention for carbon policy is shifting back to the states given the shift in momentum at the U.S. federal level. Now the next slide here shows updated CASR budgets for seasonal NOx emissions this year for Group 2 states compared to last year's seasonal emissions. What this shows is that only 5 states were below their 2017 budgets last year, and overall, all 22 states were roughly 20% above their total budgets for 2017. Although the updated policy allows a bank of nearly 100,000 tons to be used in 2017 and beyond, this still signals that additional emission mitigation measures will be needed for continued compliance. The next slide shows historical RGGI allowance auction prices. Now there are many factors that influence the auction clearing price. However, as with all cap and trade programs, they're heavily influenced by policy developments. And what I wanted to highlight here is how the RGGI allowance price has tracked policy developments both in RGGI itself and at the federal level. The RGGI program was revised 4 years ago following the 2012 program review, and the cap was reduced. This caused prices to climb off the floor and access reserve allowances in the next 2 years. Prices continued to rise as the CPP was proposed and finalized. It was thought that RGGI was going to serve as a compliance tool for member states and possibly even new states. However, the stay of the CPP by the Supreme Court and the election of Donald Trump to the White House has coincided with falling prices. Recently, prices cleared at $3 in the first quarterly auction of this year, the lowest price in over 3 years. So clearly, RGGI is heavily influenced by policy developments. And as I mentioned before, we are waiting to see how RGGI is going to structure their program going forward. The next slide shows the outcome of the joint California-Quebec allowance auctions. This shows the amount of allowances that were offered into the auction and the amount sold. What I wanted to point out here is the impact of the uncertainty on the market from the ongoing court challenge that reawakened in April last year and caused a reaction in the market. Like I said earlier, there are a lot of uncertainties in the market, but the lawsuit has had a great impact on auction results since 2016, as a request for briefs by the court signal that the court may find merit in the lawsuit. Again, we expect a ruling on the lawsuit sometime this month. Moving on to the last slide for environmental policy is Alberta. Like I mentioned earlier, we are waiting on Alberta to finalize its new carbon tax scheme, which will further disadvantage coal generation relative to gas generation by likely basing the carbon tax on the emission rate of an efficient natural gas plant. But what I wanted to highlight here is how big of a role coal plays in Alberta's power sector. It supplied over 60% of Alberta's power in 2016 and set the marginal price of power nearly 70% of the time. So how the carbon tax evolves will have a significant impact on the future of Alberta's power system, even before the required phase out of coal in 2030. So now I'll pass it off to Garrick to talk about fuel markets. Garrick?
Thanks, Tristan. So yeah, I'm going to spend most of the time talking about natural gas. We'll talk a little bit about what the current market conditions look like, but I want to spend most of the time talking about the key changes to the fundamentals and some of the other key changes to the gas forecast for the spring reference case, and I will also mention some important changes on coal as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is natural gas storage and prices. What we're looking at here is maybe familiar. It's a graph of the storage inventories and the 5-year range and 5-year average there in the gray line in the middle. And as well, we can see the Henry Hub price there, the dashed line, and you can pick up the price for that on the right-hand axis. What we've seen for the winter of 2016-2017 is after starting at another close to record high level of inventory in November, we've seen lower heating demand, but overall demand has been relatively stable compared to the 5-year average. So that's been driven by higher power and industrial demand. We saw residential and commercial demand about 6% below the 5-year average, and power, lease and plant fuel and industrial demand about 2.2% higher than the 5-year average this winter. So, and the primary driver there has been industrial demand. We're seeing a lot of new petrochemical demand in the Gulf, and that is drawing more gas resource. So we had relatively early net withdrawals, which drew the storage level down even below the 5-year average at a few times, and that's pushed prices up. But of course, with lower overall demand, production lagging is a factor in the last part of 2016. That may be cleared up to some degree coming in 2017. We'll get to that later. But again, gas prices have stayed generally above $3 on the futures market, and current futures on the front month are about $3.30. So moving on to our look at historical production, what we're seeing for 2017, and again, just want to highlight, we're looking at data that comes directly from Rystad Energy, from their UCube product, and we use that to do our upstream analysis and develop our supply curves So shale continues to be the primary driver of gas supply growth. There are three major shale plays driving growth of supply, the Marcellus, Utica, and Montney, and they combined for 2.8 Bcfd of year-over-year gains in 2016 and are on track to grow another 2.5 to 3 Bcfd in 2017. The low price environment led to a big decline in U.S. conventional production in 2016, however, and very little drilling activity in the older shale plays, again, shifted focus to completing drill uncompleted wells in the Eagle Ford, for example. And so we did see an overall decline in production in North America in 2016 as a result of some of those factors. Moving to a discussion about associated gas continues to be a major source of overall dry gas for North America. We're at about 18% of overall production, and the Permian Basin is a major focus of development activity right now, and it's also a major source of associated gas. It's about within the basin, it's about 88% of the gas that's produced in Permian is associated gas with oil or other liquids production, and it makes up more than a quarter of the total North American associated gas or gas produced from oil fields. So again, Permian is also playing a role, and we'll talk about a little about how that's shaping up the future of gas transportation in a few more slides. But we want to move on to oil rig activity. Again, that's currently for oil rigs, again, focused on the Permian Basin plays. For gas, as you can see from this chart here on the right-hand end, those two gray bands and the pinkish color bands, show where almost the exclusive focus of gas rig activity is for the U.S. And that is in the Haynesville, Utica, and Marcellus plays. Really, there's almost zero activity in terms of gas outside of that. Unfortunately, not on this chart, but we can add to that Montney as well. Primarily in British Columbia, also a major source of incremental gas. And then rig, as I mentioned, rig activity in oil plays is stimulated by prices over $45 a barrel. We've seen roughly 100% increase, a little over actually, since the 2016 trough in overall oil rigs, and as you can see, more than half of that activity is coming in the Permian Basin. So real strong focus on Permian right now, and that does produce a fair amount of associated gas. So we do expect associated gas to continue to be a major source of dry gas for the North American market. And for export, especially over the next few years. Moving on to some of the changes in our reference case in our approach. So based on some client feedback about the granularity of our gas pricing in PJM and its impact on the power markets, we have added 7 new gas hubs that we will forecast and report prices for, and we have also rearranged the way that we connect those those gas hubs to power plants in throughout PJM and a little bit beyond. So we're doing away with, so what you can see on the map here is in red the new hubs that we are adding for this cycle, and in blue the other hubs in the Northeast region. And so just to highlight some of the key changes, we're doing away with the Transco Zone 5 and splitting that out into Transco Zone 5 North and South in accordance with how recent the recent pricing on ICE and NYMEX is happening. We're adding the TCO, which is a Columbia delivered price, especially for Columbia, for units that are sourcing their gas from Columbia. We're adding the Transco Zone 6 non-New York price point, and that will get a little bit better pricing, more accurate pricing for those utilities that source their gas in eastern and northern New Jersey. Dominion North Point, at times there's been some divergence between Dominion North and Dominion South due to capacity constraints. That's largely been eliminated recently, but we're adding that Dominion North Point in order to capture any of that dynamic going forward. Iroquois Zone 2 will now be the price point for that Southern New York, the section of Southern New York, not including New York City. And then we've added TEDCO M2 as well for sort of Eastern Ohio region. So a lot of changes here, and this should go a long way to improve modeling of some of the differentials between the transact areas or the market areas in the power sector. And again, the colors here you're looking at, the sort of rainbow colors are the various zones in the power market. A quick summary of gas transmission changes. What we're looking at here are some of the recently approved projects, and we had a slew of those come through in response to the anticipated no quorum at FERC. Currently, FERC does not have a quorum and can't approve projects, and it could be several months before that's resolved, before Congress is able to approve the Trump administration's pick for an additional FERC commissioner. So the week before essentially that quorum ran out, the Atlantic Sunrise, Rover, and Rain Express, as well as the Northern Access projects. All of these are really aimed at moving Marcellus gas to market both to the Gulf and to the Northeast. Those were all approved just in the first or the last week before the quorum disappeared at FERC. And then some recent activity in terms of filing that really highlights what the focus is going forward are these projects, which are all sort of clustered in the South Texas area. So they're all aimed at bringing additional gas from either Marcellus, Haynesville, or in the Gulf Coast, the case of Gulf Coast Express from the Permian Basin, and making it available to petrochem and for LNG and export to Mexico. And the Valley Crossing pipeline there in green at the very bottom is actually a a project to export gas to Mexico. So that would be taking gas from the South Texas area and the Agua Dulce hub, TGP Zone 0 area, and moving it actually via a underwater pipeline there at the border crossing, and delivering it to the Mexican system. So those are the changes on gas transmission project. Just want to highlight very briefly that some of the changes to the natural gas forecast drivers. Again, so on the right or on the left-hand side here, we're looking at some of the high-level synthesis of the demand drivers or the forecast drivers from the fall and how they're changing in the spring. And just want to highlight briefly a couple of these things. We do see supply costs improving with improving recovery factor and some other factors on the supply side. So especially near to medium term. Longer term supply costs haven't come down all that much cycle to cycle. Demand, so modestly, we're looking for modestly higher demand growth from the residential, commercial, industrial sector, primarily from the industrial sector, and then lower demand from the power sector for gas as the power demand is lower. We're seeing as we saw earlier, and then increasing renewable penetration as well. Exports, we'd see higher potential medium and long term for LNG, in part due to a large reduction in the queue of coal-fired power plants in Asia. But China drives that, but it's been a reduction across the board in Asia. So we see some increased potential for LNG as a result. And then for Mexican exports longer term, we're seeing less certainty of growth. Right now, it's relatively flat after 2025, and we're looking at some new sources of gas available to Mexico domestically in the longer run, so that may reduce their need in the 2030s for gas in the U.S. And then in transmission, a continued focus on Marcellus and getting Montney gas from British Columbia to market, but a new focus, again, as I highlighted, on getting gas to the Gulf Texas region for LNG, Mexico, and petrochemical demand. So moving on to coal, I'm going to very quickly cover coal and then hand it back to Tom. Coal prices and production. Production's been was lower across all basins in 2016. We had significant slowing, though we do anticipate that to slow down, that decline to slow down in 2017 significantly. Producers are cautiously optimistic. The CEO of Peabody in an interview with Bloomberg recently said, we're much more interested in growing shareholder returns, shareholder value, than we are on growing tons of volume. So I think it's becoming clear to the industry that a dramatic recovery in coal demand is not really in the cards. And prices, we did see prices buoyed in the second half of 2016 by some domestic policy in China, where the number of working hours were reduced dramatically. That policy has been essentially reversed at this point, and so you can see from the chart, the bottom chart, that the eastern markets tend to be lifted when the international price, which is that Richards Bay price at the top, that's the FOB price from South Africa, sort of the benchmark, one of the global benchmarks. As the international prices rises, you do see Central App and Northern App, as well as Illinois Basin, get a bump, but as you can see, much less so or not at all from Western Bituminous and Southern Powder River Basin coal prices. And then finally, moving on to the forecast drivers for coal. Again, just highlighting the major changes. We have a new supply cost and capacity modeling with commodity research data and model that we now purchase from Commodity Research Unit. Gives us a lot of insight into the an array of drivers for coal supply cost. The demand picture, lower gas prices, increasing renewables, lower demand, lower load forecasts do really underscore that we're going to see modestly lower power sector coal demand than in the previous forecast, and so that probably means moderately declining coal demand over the course of the 25-year forecast. And then finally, we're taking a lower, we have much lower expectations about exports for this go around, in large part due to the canceling of that capacity, the planned capacity, coal capacity in Asia that I mentioned earlier, as well as local resistance, still pretty strong to developing West Coast terminals, and there's been less of a push by the developers of those terminals. So that's what I had to say about the fuel markets. Appreciate your attention, and I'm going to hand it back to Tom. I'm not sure we're going to have too much time for questions, but we do have a few questions. So I'll let Tom moderate that.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you, Garrick. Yeah, we do have, I guess, one question regarding the declining demand growth, and they were inquiring whether we're subtracting the distributed generation and demand response and energy efficiency. On the distributed generation, again, if it's like rooftop solar, again, kind of behind the meter, behind the residential meter, that is reduced from demand, as well as energy efficiency and demand response. Utility scale distributed generation is actually modeled in our resource mix. So that addresses that question. So I guess there were no other questions. I just want to mention that the slides and the recording for this presentation, it will be shared with all registrants. And now I want to talk a little bit about some of the additional advisory services that we offer. Early on, I was very reference case focused, and again, that's where we would do much of the asset analysis, as well as the market analysis. However, within advisors, we do have perform energy technology analysis. So again, we look at energy storage and microgrids, and much of that is coming from our interaction within ABB. So we're able to bring a lot more expertise to bear on many of these items. We also perform nodal or LMP analyses, so we can look at any constraint and congestion analysis. Through our Velocity Suite tool, we look at historic pricing trends and compare how those prices relate to a delivery hub. We look at transmission analysis. Again, much of that is through Velocity Suite. And then finally, we can perform portfolio analyses, looking at integrated resource planning or any kind of resource optimization modeling that you might want to consider. Just want to wrap up with if you have any additional questions or inquiries. So if we look at the next slide, again, you can direct any sales inquiries to Gina Melson, and her contact information is listed there. And then finally, I want to thank our my co-presenters, Kathy Jones, Tristan Wallace, Garrick Hoops, and of course the unsung hero behind all this is Dana Berry. She organizes all these, and again, we really couldn't put on these presentations without her. So again, just a quick reminder, we're going to send out the presentation and record it, everyone. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, and have a good day.